Right, so this is the sixth video, and we should hopefully get through the majority of depression now. So the next explanation is the cognitive explanation of depression. So remember, this assumes that all mental illness is caused by faulty thinking processes. And so depression is caused by faulty thought processes. The depressed individual believes that others are critical of them, and they will interpret any events and things like that in a negative fashion. So they don't do well on something, they assume it's because they are awful, not because they didn't give it enough time or something like that. They take the worst interpretation possible and go with that. This causes them to become socially withdrawn because they get negative experiences from those interactions. Whenever they interact with someone, they end up feeling bad about themselves, so they socially withdraw, which then indeed makes it even worse because then they feel lonely and think that people don't like them, things like that. Remember, we can go much further with this explanation than is on this slide. So we can talk about Beck and the negative triad. So remember, we've got a view of the self, the world, and the future. And these can be either positive or negative. If all three are negative, it will lead to kind of depressive thoughts and so on. Remember, these faulty thinking processes are things like selective thinking, only picking out the say, for example, with depression, the bad things. You don't focus on anything good you've done, just the negative. We've got catastrophizing, where we turn very minor problems into like a mountain of a problem, turning molehills into mountains. Black and white thinking, so everything is either brilliant or it's awful, and there's nothing in between. You won't see the areas of grey. These faulty thinking processes, remember, lead to negative automatic thoughts. So these are things that you generally feel about yourself, that you constantly need to get people's approval and they're not giving it. And these give us schemata, negative schemas. These are beliefs about the world, about ourselves, things like that, that we interpret or we use to make sense of the world. So if you had sort of depression and you were to do really well on something, you will assume that the teacher was being nice, or that the questions were really easy. You won't take any credit for the skill that you put in. Whereas if you failed on something, you assume it's because you are bad, not because the questions were difficult or whatever. You put anything negative due to yourself, anything positive due to external circumstance. That's just one example. We could do lots of others, like about, say, people not liking you and things. That is the explanation of it as far as we go. This is a picture from the textbook which shows that kind of process. You go through and these negative thoughts get triggered by an event which cause negative feelings, behaviours, consequences, and so on and so forth. But it's all going through that faulty thinking, negative thoughts, and schemata kind of process all the way through. And we've got various studies that support this idea. So Clark and Beck found evidence at all levels of depression for negative and cognitive thoughts. Seligman suggested cognitive aspects of depression in humans is the same as kind of learned helplessness in animals. There's the study by Beck, which I've included on your study guide thing, and Alloy and Abramson. These are the ones I always mention in class. I'll just bring it in rather than copying and pasting. So Beck is the one that looks at depressed patients and found they had lower self-esteem. It also found, this is the example where they kind of have negative thoughts about themselves. So again, I've mentioned several times the woman that said she should have picked a better day for the picnic when it wasn't going to rain. That she couldn't really blame themselves she blamed herself for these problems. And Alloy and Abramson found similar things. And so we've got various studies in favour of this. Again, we can look at conflicting evidence or other explanations. Again, will come from the biological explanation within depression. Hankin and Abramson also in support. There's not a lot of conflicting evidence at the moment. We'd really focus on the other explanation as the conflicting. So biological. A problem with all of this, though, is that it is very hard to measure, remember. But we also see that CBT is very effective. So So remember, if the treatment is effective, it will probably mean that it is an actual cause or big influence with depression. Again, the biggest problem with lots of these explanations is that we don't get cause and effect. Perhaps your negative thoughts come from having depression, not the other way around. Yeah, so this is useful as it comes up with a therapy that actually works. Importantly, this is why it's kind of much better than some of the other theories that we've covered so far. It explains individual difference. So this explains why one person gets depression and the other one doesn't, because they have different cognitive thought processes. It also kind of explains why they get different levels of seriousness of this. So that's quite good. We'll move on to one of the treatments now. We'll look at drug therapy. It's blank on this PowerPoint because there've not been any kind of questions on it so far. But remember, drug therapy for depression works in a couple of ways. So the key bit is that it raises monoamines in some way, or it raises the activity of them. So it raises the activity of the monoamines, which means that we get more of them going through, and so the symptoms of depression should abate or disappear because we're suddenly getting more motivated, and so on and so forth. So there's a couple of ones that do this. Remember, there's monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Yeah, tying back to that monoamine oxidase. These destroy or denature the monoamine oxidase. Which means that it's not breaking down the monoamines anymore. This leads to an increase in monoamines, so the messages get through. We've also got tricyclic acids. These are much older ones, really. Tricyclic acids treat serotonin or treat depression by making the reactions of serotonin or the reactions of the monoamines stronger. So you need less of them going through to cause the kind of reaction. Or there's also famously selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So remember, one of the problems, or one of the reasons that you might not have a lot of serotonin is it's being reabsorbed, so it's not in the synaptic gap to be used. It's going back into like a cell. So what selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors do is they block that process. So it's no longer being absorbed or reuptaken, and it's constantly, or it remains in the synaptic gap, so that the reaction can form and it can be caused. Again, we'll probably start a few of the things to kind of beef this up a bit, the same as in the other one. So these are prescribed by the doctor. There's various, and you've been monitored on them. There's various drugs, and each individual might be given their own kind of prescription. Whether it's strength, whether it's the correct cocktail, things like that. All of these are there to kind of boost your mood and things like that. Remember, we've got a couple of studies that are in favour of this when we look at the evaluation. So I'll bring the first two in. I'll drag them across like I did before. So Karp and Frank and Spiegel are in favour of it. So Karp and Frank is very important in this case. This found that many studies found that including including CBT treatment, including a therapy treatment, didn't improve on kind of recovery if they were already on drugs. The drugs themselves are what improved people's behaviour. They made them better. Spiegel also found that there was an improvement in behaviour when people were on tricyclics. However, one of the problems is, again, side effects of this, the same as we found with schizophrenia. These can include, they can cause side effects like cardiac problems. They also, not just these, but other medication. Remember the big problem, other medications, other than tricyclics, can increase the chance of suicide. Because the first thing that improves is your motivation. So before your mood actually improves, your motivation does, and that's quite a big side effect, really. Remember, we've got Kuiken, which acts as kind of evaluation of this. It found that CBT was more effective than drugs. Remember, drugs, you come off the drugs and the effectiveness, or sorry, you will relapse because it's not curing the problem, it's just masking the symptoms. So you become reliant on them. Whereas if you're on CBT, which is the alternative, you get taught a skill, you get taught a thing that you can do, so that's repeatable and you can do it again and again and again. I'll include the side effects, so I've got it on a list. All the other things also apply from drugs. This could be depowering, it's a process of social control. Trying to remember what else we said about the drugs from schizophrenia. We could probably make a few points about this being like stabilizing. So even if we're not saying that this is going to cure you, it might give you enough kind of balance so that you can have CBT or something like that. We can make you better that way. So it's got that stabilizing process. But again, if it's not really curing you, it's just hiding the symptoms. And some people have suggested that again, it's kind of a chemical cosh. Rather than feeling depressed, you just feel nothing. It takes away something that makes you kind of you. What I'll do in the next little few minutes is I'll try and get through dream therapy because it's much quicker than CBT, and then I'll save CBT for the last video. So dream therapy, remember, is based on Freud, and it's the principle that your unconscious holds all of this stuff, all of these repressed memories, all these bad feelings about yourself. But even though they're in the unconscious and you're not aware of them, they will have an effect on your conscious mind. They will have some sort of impact on your behavior. And remember, your unconscious speaks to us through your dreams. All dreams are wish fulfillment. So what will happen is you'll come along to the therapist. They'll talk to you about your dreams. You have to remember them in as much detail as possible. And it's up for the psychiatrist to turn the manifest content, which is, remember, what actually happens in your dream, so like riding a roller coaster, and turning it into latent content. The latent content is the actual meaning of the dream. And remember, this goes through a process of differentiation. It goes through a process of defense mechanisms. And so, for example, Amy may be really, really angry at Alex, but she would feel bad if she knew that, so she changes it into being angry at somebody that reminds her of Alex. So we change this through various defense mechanisms, or we take all this random imagery and run it into a story. This can use universal symbols, so like obviously where the sword equals a penis, an oven equals a vagina, or individual symbols. So you may all have different interactions or beliefs about clowns, and that will affect kind of what that means in your dream. So by uncovering all this, by talking about the things that are in your dreams, you unleash it, let it out, and once it's out, you can deal with it. It means that it's not going to cause you problems anymore. Evaluation, nice and easy. The client has to be trusted to report the dream accurately. If they miss bits out, if they repress parts, if they lie, then the interpretation is going to be wrong. Again, big problem, it's Freud. So all of this is relying on interpretation. So it's not scientific, it's not actually true, it's not measurable. Remember, the root kind of issue with this is that it assumes that your dreams are a road into your unconscious, and it's things in your unconscious which cause the problem. But there's also the alternative that dreams mean absolutely nothing. They don't tell us anything about you. So if that's true, it means that, if they're a byproduct of like these days activities, but they don't tell us anything about what's going on or what's causing the depression, the therapy is just useless. It has been shown to be effective though with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm going to move down a second. I've got a couple of studies about dreams here. So Shapiro and Storr, again, just reiterate the point that we can't really trust Freudian interpretation. And that brings us to the end of the video. We've got one more left for the first half, and then I'll start talking to you in that same video about synoptic elements and so on and so forth.